right, hey everybody. Welcome to episode 3 of the Grappler's Dilemma podcast. Today's show, we are talking about traditional martial arts. So something, subject near and dear to both of our hearts. Before we get into that, how are you doing, Aaron?
Oh, really well. It's been a good weekend. Dude, doing this show, I've gone through these waves where I'm like super excited about martial arts, and this podcast is like reinvigorating that. Like having to think about all this stuff again. It's just, it kind of makes it, I don't know, it makes it fun again.
Yeah, I feel exactly the same way. So.
Yeah, in a very odd way. Oh, we also have a new mic setup, so you guys might notice like an upgrade in audio quality.
It feels very professional.
Yeah. Maybe I'll post pictures later, but we have like boom arms and like nice Rode podcast mics. It's pretty slick.
So we're starting the show today with the intro question, which is, what are your 3 favorite martial arts movies? So we'll sort of take turns, I think, one at a time, but why don't you go first?
Okay. Yeah, this one's easy. And my wife, if she knew this question was being posed, she would have guessed, and so would have all my little brothers, probably my parents as well. But my number one favorite martial arts movie of all time is called Surf Ninjas. And it stars Ernie Reyes Jr. and Rob Schneider. Rob Schneider. Okay, here's the thing. He plays a 15-year-old in this movie. Okay. How old do you think he was when he played the role?
27.
He was 31 years old, playing a redheaded high school kid. He was already on Saturday Night Live at the time, which is really funny to see it. But anyway, so Ernie Reyes Jr. Is that what we want to do? We want to give like a quick synopsis of the movie?
Please.
Okay. So Ernie Reyes Jr., he also played Keno in TMNT 2.
Yep.
Yeah, with the Ooze, which I think was
Secret of the Ooze.
Yeah, that's right. So he was in that. He was in another movie that's actually on my list, so I'll talk about that in a second. He and his dad were part of Inasanto's like choreography group, so he like grew up in this martial arts family. And the movie like starts off pretty hot coming out of the gate, where it's like these ninjas are coming to attack him at school and stuff, and he's hanging out with, old man Rob Schneider, and this guy with an eye patch ends up showing up, and it ends up being his uncle. He finds out he's a prince in this place called Patusan, which is supposed to be like kind of close to, I think, Thailand. A lot of the art style in the movie is very, very Thai looking. It ends up being a made up place, and pretty much the guy with the eye patch shows up. I feel like I'm describing a fever dream. The guy with the eye patch shows up and tells him, "Hey, you need to return back home to Patusan because you are part of this prophecy where you're this warrior prince, and you have to fight this guy named General Chi." And General Chi is played by Leslie Nielsen. Leslie Nielsen from Naked Gun. Yeah. Or what was the other one he was in? Anyway, Airplane? Was he in Airplane?
Yeah. Also from Airplane.
And he, also
Forbidden Planet, a classic sci-fi movie from the 50s.
I've never seen that one. But General Chi, it shows like this battle in the beginning of the movie where he's like trying to take over the island. And it's kind of weird because there's no resources on the island. They kind of insinuate that General Chi's going to take over the world, but there's no way you would be able to do it from this like dirt plot in the middle of the ocean. But Leslie Nielsen has half a face.
He has no nuclear weapons.
He has nothing, dude. He got stomped on by an elephant, so he's like half cyborg. So a half cyborg Leslie Nielsen dressed up as a samurai. That's the bad guy for the movie. And the entire movie, anyway, the story, I know it sounds, I know what it sounds like. And
if you asked me to say that back to you, I would be totally at a loss.
No, I get it, but the fight scenes in the movie are so good. And Rob Schneider's pretty funny in it. Tone Loc is in it. He plays like a kind of a major character. But the choreography, the fight scenes, I mean, that's what makes a martial arts movie, right? Is like the story is really just, it's like a vessel. right? Just like Thanksgiving, like all the food just kind of feels like a vessel for the gravy kind of a thing. The story feels very much like that, but the choreography is so high level that you almost forget that the storyline is so ridiculous. And it starts out hot, dude. Like crazy ninjas, eye patch guy, you're a warrior prince. All that stuff probably gets revealed in the first 10 minutes of the movie. They only surf twice in the entire movie, which is kind of hilarious considering it's a movie called Surf Ninjas. But one little factoid before I pass it over to you is Ernie Reyes Jr. was one of the striking coaches for the Diaz brothers. And I was watching I was watching the UFC event and I saw him and I was like, dude, I recognize that guy. He's way old looking now, right? And I Googled it and like, holy crap, it's Ernie Reyes Jr., who was like one of my martial arts heroes growing up from this movie. Like
does that mean like, does he have like legit pedigree, or is it just like Steven Seagal hanging out with Anderson Silva?
He has legit pedigree. Like the quality of martial artist. I think that technically he described him as his kicking coach, if I remember correctly.
Interesting.
Like,
does he have like a taekwondo karate background?
There's one sequence. If anyone watches this movie, which I highly recommend,
I think I have to now.
Yeah, you have to for sure. But there's also like Cinemassacre does like a 23-minute review of it where they show like some of the highlight movie clips. So if you want to watch that instead, that's fine. But the movie itself, it's worthy of a sit down. This is a movie that was on VHS when I was a kid, and we had like a small gas station in our like little hick town. We probably rented it every weekend. I don't know why my parents never just bought it, but it was like just a staple in the house. And I probably chose to rent it for the most part. And I was the oldest brother, so I gotta kind of pull that move. But yeah, so that's kind of like Ernie Reyes Jr. Yeah, dude. Andy played Donatello, I think either in the first or second Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles live action movie. Yeah, so he wore the suit and stuff. But anyway, yeah, go watch it. And I want more people to be able to talk about this movie with, because it was such a huge part of my childhood and I still love it. It's free on YouTube. Totally free. Yeah. Okay. Anyway, Cody.
Very good. So I have to say before we go, I kind of feel like your choices are going to be more interesting, and you're throwing curveballs and I'm throwing fastballs down the middle. But my first movie, kind of a no-brainer, is, well, let me say this before I say what it is. I really wanted to pick more of like the old movies, and I was actually sick last week, so I had a lot of time to like watch a lot of old kung fu movies and stuff, and I do love that stuff, but I just think the modern ones are better in general.
Sure.
And so I'm going with John Wick.
Oh, dude, that's a good. Yeah, that's almost like, obligatory.
You know, I'm not even going to give a plot synopsis. Like, if you don't know the story, like, go see John Wick. It's like probably the best action movie of the last 20 years, and one of the greats ever, I think. But it's the role Keanu was born to play, and you know, he does a lot of his own stunts, and he trained judo and jiu-jitsu and firearms training.
Terran Tactical.
And I think he trained under Machado, one of the Machado brothers. But or maybe Henzo.
But there's legit jiu-jitsu in the movie.
Yeah, but there's like legit jiu-jitsu mixed with gunplay. Yeah. So he's like arm barring people and then shooting them in the head, and like or like shoulder throw, headshot, lots of headshots.
Well, that movie, it seems fantastical, but like all the movements and stuff are super grounded in reality. That's what makes it really
it's totally ridiculous, and it's got great like emotional appeal. Like the same reason that people like the Taken movies. Like people love a revenge story.
Totally.
But Taken are like, I can't really take 70-year-old Liam Neeson seriously as this badass, but
he has a particular set of skills.
You know, with the use of a lot of like stuntmen and camera work that make it work. But John Wick, I feel like it's better. It's just really good fight choreography, and like when they, spoiler alert, kill his dog, it's so brutal. because it's like the one memory that he had of his wife, and it's such a cute little puppy that you're just like totally fine with him killing like 500 people
for the dog.
the rest of the movie. Yeah, and yeah, I mean, what can you say? I would say my favorite fight scene is probably. I want to say I forgive me if I'm getting this wrong, but I think there's like a fight scene with a female assassin in a hotel room. Does that sound right? Yeah. I thought that was the best. There was like some good jiu-jitsu.
Sure.
You know, having to fight jiu-jitsu like in close quarters with like furniture around and stuff is something that like I've thought about a lot. Like I used to grapple my roommate on the couch all the time, and it would sort of change. You don't have as much space to like shrimp around the mat like you do normally, so it's sort of like it kind of changes the dynamic a little bit. But
dude, I think so. I didn't mention that. I think my favorite fight scene from the Surf Ninjas movie, they're like fighting in this restaurant, and these guys show up wearing like blue camo, the most like egregiously noticeable outfits a ninja could possibly wear, and kendo helmets. And so the fight scene's going on, and then Rob Schneider's just walking around with his fingers on his temple. Oh, yeah, because he thinks that by thinking about winning the fight, he's actually helping the people. At some point, I can't remember exactly. Well, I do, but it would take time to explain. He thinks he has this power where he can determine the outcome of events just by thinking about it. So it's just like awesome fight scenes, and Rob Schneider walking through the middle of it with his fingers to his temple. But anyway, my number 2, and you've probably seen this one before, but is The Rundown with The Rock.
yes,
Okay, so that movie's awesome. Stars The Rock, Sean William Scott, Christopher Walken, and
Stifler.
Yeah, Stifler, and the most attractive version of Rosario Dawson. She like ever the best role she's ever put on, as far as I'm concerned. But
Christopher Walken as like basically like a slave owner.
Yeah, he's running like a gold mine.
Yeah,
a gold mine in Brazil. And so anyway, The Rock is in debt with a mobster, and to settle it, he has to retrieve the mobster's son from Brazil. Ernie Reyes Jr. shows up. He plays this Brazilian freedom fighter, and he fights The Rock. It's a really slick fight scene. His physique looks like he's on low-level steroids, which is pretty cool. The Rock, obviously, but Ernie Reyes Jr. And
The Rock's on steroids?
Yeah, well, not according to him. So he has this thing where he won't touch guns. Like it doesn't explain
like
why.
Batman.
Yeah, exactly. It doesn't explain why. But then the ending sequence, like obviously, if they're going to set it up with the beginning of the movie, I don't do guns. You know he's going to touch guns before the movie's over. And so the final sequence of the movie, where all that comes to a head, is certainly the best sequence of the movie. And it's something that I've been reenacting since I was like 13 years old with sticks and airsoft guns. So yeah.
Well, it's interesting, like the role that guns is sort of a theme I'm noticing here, but the role like guns play in martial arts movies, and like
Sure.
We were talking. Didn't make my list, but I did watch Rush Hour this last week, and it's like there's a lot of good gun disarm stuff, and I just love that stuff where like he like disarms the guy and turns the gun on him, but then he like drops the magazine and like pops the slide off like with one hand, and it's like there's something cool about it. It's like knowing your way around a firearm enough that you could just like disarm it because you don't want to.
Jackie Chan was my Bruce Lee growing up, I think. Anyway.
Well, okay, my second movie is one of my favorite movies of all time. Kind of an art film. Early 2000s, I think, by Ang Lee, who's not really a action movie guy normally, although he did do a very terrible Hulk movie that has sort of been forgotten, but he mostly does like art movies. But Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon.
Oh, okay.
Stars Chow Yun-fat, Michelle Yeoh. It takes place. I won't go into the plot too much, but it takes place in sort of ancient China, or I don't know, some period in Chinese history, and it involves like this legendary sword that sort of is like kind of the focus of the plot, and there's sort of different storylines that are like weaving around it.
It won a bunch of awards too.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. And Chow Yun-fat is he's based off of this sort of mythical warrior from like Chinese mythology, history, depending on how you see it, that like there were these sort of like warrior monk types that were said to like have almost like these superhuman kind of abilities. And the way it's portrayed in the film, it was one of the first films. It was actually must have been in the 90s because it was before The Matrix, I think.
Okay.
But it was one of the first films to use a lot of wires.
Yeah. I remember them running up bamboo and stuff.
Yeah, they run up wall. They can kind of fly almost a little bit, and it's just beautiful fight choreography. But there's a great story behind it. It's sort of got a little bit of everything. It's like some romance, some adventure. There's like different, all this sort of different like terrains of like the Chinese landscape, like the mountains and forests and desert. And
Chow Yun-fat, also in Bulletproof Monk with Sean William Scott.
And my favorite fight scene is Chow Yun-fat and the girl in the bamboo forest.
Okay, yeah.
And what's cool about it is he's not trying to beat her. He's trying to humble her and get her to be his student. She's not trying to beat him. She's just trying to steal his sword. So there's like this interesting dynamic.
Yeah.
But then they end up fighting on these bamboo trees, and she is like young and full of anger and hasn't mastered like the calm, so she can't like balance properly.
Gotcha.
And he's like using like the flow of the bamboo like against her. As just like it just sort of captures a lot of sort of like Chinese philosophy, I think, in a fight.
Yeah.
And so
Okay, my number 3, I went back and forth between 2, and I want to reiterate that these movies are our 3 favorites, not 3 movies that we think are the best or even necessarily good. Because most of these movies I wouldn't even recommend people watch. But I think so. It was either between the Power Rangers movie with Ivan Ooze or Warriors of Virtue, which anyone who knows that movie, it was about this kid who falls into like a whirlpool, ends up going to like this mystical place, and there's like these kangaroo humanoid warriors that he ends up teaming up with. But I picked the Power Rangers movie, and that's another one of those movies that the same thing with the with Surf Ninjas. It was one of those movies that was at the gas station. So I just rented it over and over and over again. And then our library started carrying it. So I would get it over and over and over again. And the idea, I don't know how many guys out there were really into Power Rangers growing up, but that was like my jam. It was all we watched. It was, I wanted to be a Power Ranger so bad, like I said in the first episode. And, but this guy named Ivan Ooze comes back, and he's kind of like this demonic force, kind of alien-ish. And the good guys, like the mentor or leader, I guess, of the Power Rangers, Zordon, like details to the Power Rangers that, hey, this guy's bad news, and if we lose this fight, then the world is over and everything we know is going to be destroyed.
Stakes couldn't be higher.
The stakes could not be higher. And they come down, like the opening scene, they're like skydiving, and Tommy's on a snowboard coming out, like skydiving. And then it goes straight from that to them like rollerblading back home, doing like stunts and stuff. But yeah, it's really cool. So it's just this tale of them like trying to defeat this guy, Ivan Ooze, as he's trying to take over the world. The final fight scene sucks because it's all in CGI. But all the fights with like his like weird, like gunky children are really cool, and they're kind of like, there's like these portions of the fight scenes that are like they're kind of Crouching Tiger-esque, where like the White Ranger jumps up and he like kicks the guy in the chest as he's floating in the air, but he kicks him like 100 times, then kicks him into a wall, and the guy explodes into a thing of ooze. So stuff like that I always thought was really fun. And they were making like, there's like little indications pointing back to the show, so like these little Easter eggs in it. But that dude, but I could still watch that movie and have an awesome time with it. I've showed my kids, both of them their attention wasn't grasped at all by the movie, but my son's into Power Rangers now, so maybe that will change. But yeah, so my number 3 is Power Rangers the movie, and it's that's it. That's just the subtitle.
It's
of
like
it is
mid 90s, late 90s.
Yeah, it's got to be mid. I would say probably late 90s. I think I was like 5 or 6 when it came out, but yeah, all the dude, it's really really slick. And final point, all of their like their I don't even know what you would call it. Their armor, like when they transform into the Power Rangers, they upgraded it. So
it's like stylized.
Yeah, it looked different than it did in the show. So it wasn't just spandex suits. They had like these cool, the padding was more pronounced and it looked more like armor, and they had these cool new gadgets and stuff. But dude, even talking about it makes me excited because
it's hilarious.
Yeah, I know. And anyone that's gonna hate on that, dude, I think you should just go watch it. If you're into Power Rangers, you've probably already seen it, but I don't know. It might be just a fun thing to check out sometime.
Okay, so my last movie is so I'll preface it this way. I used to be a big Bruce Lee guy, but as I've gotten older, I don't care for Bruce as much. Okay. And Jackie Chan is my guy.
Yeah. And
it was difficult to decide which Jackie Chan movie to pick, but I think the best has to be Police Story.
I've never seen it.
It just has like the perfect blend. It's just like action, comedy, action, comedy, action. Okay. It's just sort of like structured perfectly with a sort of a storyline. I couldn't even tell you what the storyline is there, but it involves like some corruption or something that.
They did a new one. Like
there's 4 of them.
There's like a one that was done like 2020, I think, or 2015 maybe.
Jackie Chan is?
Jackie Chan's he's older, but dude, I've only seen the first one.
Well, the third one was released in America as Super Cop.
Okay.
And that I haven't seen that, but that's supposed to be good.
Gotcha. Worthy of a watch for sure.
Yeah, but I mean, basically what you love about the guy, first of all, he's been in amazing shape for the last like 40 years. Like he doesn't seem to age, and he's, in my opinion, like the greatest stuntman of all time.
Sure.
And just great fight choreographer, and the fact that he doesn't take himself that seriously, it makes him way more appealing. I think is what I like about him compared to Bruce Lee.
Yeah.
Is like he's willing to like be the butt of the joke sometimes. He's willing to like get his butt kicked and then like come back and recover.
And he recognized that a lot of his stuff was performative, I think.
Yeah.
Like a lot of his stunts and the martial arts he did.
But it's just like some of the stunts of this movie are crazy. And like, he got hospitalized in the filming of it.
Dude.
Yeah. Like he always does. And the comedy parts are like really funny too.
Did you watch it with subtitles or did you watch it like with
subtitles? Okay. Yeah. It's and it's like it's always like that sort of slapsticky thing where he's like in some embarrassing situation, usually involving a woman and like some misunderstanding or he's something like that.
Like Rush Hour with
the
Snoopy tattoo.
And it's just great. So
that's awesome.
All right, so let's get into next thing I want to talk about is like our own personal history with traditional martial arts, whether it's movies, books, what kind of training we've done, and sort of how that was part of our own like martial arts journey.
Okay. Do you want to start? Or do you want me to start with that?
Yeah, I'll go. I won't be too long, but our first episode, I talked about how I got interested in martial arts like after being the victim of an assault, and I'll have to tell that full story.
Dude, that's a good origin story for a martial artist too.
But I started out just like I would get books from the library, on like kung fu and stuff, or like just look up stuff on the internet, or like ask people to show me. Like sometimes somebody would show me some stuff, but it would just be a lot of like I was particularly interested in like kung fu and qigong.
Yeah.
So it was like a lot of horse stance
Sure.
and a lot of you know, I'm trying to describe
Energy,
it.
moving energy.
Yeah, yeah, a lot of like flowy arms or like
Reverse
hundreds
punches.
of reps of like punches and stuff like that. Later on, I found a Korean lady who taught Tai Chi that I became good friends with, and I took that real seriously, like for months, and like I learned the 24 form Tai Chi. It's like a series of steps that
They call
are
it kata
put together.
or no? I guess Tai Chi. Was that Chinese?
Kata is a Japanese word,
Okay.
but it's like you could think of it as like a kata, but it's more flowy and movement. Yeah,
Sure.
than what you would think of as like Japanese kata or
Would
karate.
you consider
kata.
that your first martial art? Is Tai Chi?
Yeah, probably.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, you can barely consider it a martial art.
Oh, contraire. I've heard.
What I was doing could barely be considered a martial art
Okay.
because there was like no contact with other human beings.
Yeah.
So I feel like that's an important.
Yeah,
prerequisite.
that's probably
But there's like a lot of seaweed hands, but it's very difficult because like it really challenges just like your coordination and your balance, and you have to move very, very, very slowly and in a particular way, and you know. I really enjoyed it at the time. Like
Sure.
I don't know that it has that much value combatively, and when I say that much, I don't think it really has any value combatively. But you know, it has value to some people for certain reasons, and it's a big part of Chinese culture, and it was a cool thing for me to like have the chance to like study under a real master.
Absolutely.
Then later on, when I was living in Seattle, I trained Aikido for like 3 months, about.
Okay.
So not super long, but I think I remember Kota Gaeshi.
Okay. Yeah.
Do you know what that is?
Yeah, the wrist lock, like wrist lock throw.
And Ikkyo, which is like the classic throwing a drunk guy out of a bar move, or like, you know, you're under arrest, like, you know, force a guy's arm behind his back to cuff him.
Created by Yushiba. We couldn't remember his name last time.
Yeah. Well, so I want to mention this. So during that whole period, like when I was very interested in like Eastern philosophy and stuff, I read these sort of 3 classic books. One was Art of War by Sun Tzu, the ancient Chinese tome, which is really, really worth the read. It's not terribly long, and it's pretty easy to understand. And it's just sort of these thought-provoking little I don't know what you would call like little
excerpt. What kind of fortune cookie kind of?
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
like 2-sentence things.
Well, a lot of ancient Chinese philosophy has that sort of quality where it's like they're trying to say things in a very simple way, I think.
Sure.
And that's what gives it this feeling of like timelessness.
Yes.
You know, it's not like, you know, us Westerners, we usually like things packaged in a story. Like, Art of War is compared sometimes to Machiavelli, but that's like the principles of like politics, but it's like packaged in a story.
Yes.
But Art of War and things like that it's just these sort of like snippets, these like little bits of wisdom about, you know, when strong, feign weakness, but when weak, feign strength. Stuff like that. The other was Dao Jeet Kune Do by Bruce Lee.
Yeah.
And then I also read Art of Peace by Ueshiba, who founded Aikido.
Yeah.
And that's a cool book.
I've never read that. I didn't know he
Yeah.
had written a book.
Yeah, and he talks about sort of his principles. He talks a lot about like the center line and like how you attack someone's center line.
A lot of
and-
the Eastern martial arts discuss that. The center, like, and I understand that it's applicable to like contemporary martial arts, but like when they talk about the center line, it's almost like it's such a central component of the discussion.
No pun intended.
Yeah, very funny. Yeah, good pickup. Yeah, I find that to be kind of an interesting thing.
Did you ever read Dao Jukindo?
I I've thumbed through. I own a copy of it.
Yeah.
And my brother-in-law is actually the one that recommended, but I had not actually read it.
Well, he didn't actually write it like as a book. It was sort of compiled from his writings.
Gotcha. Okay.
But it's very different than Art of Peace, as you can imagine, because it's all about like the most like efficient way to just like end somebody.
Sure.
I remember the thing that stuck to me. There was like a diagram of a man, and he looks like some big bruiser.
Sure.
And it's like which targets will like inflict the most pain, and like
Just big red circle.
so
around the
it's
crotch.
like that was like they're like numbered in terms of like priority. So it's like eyes, groin, knees, etc.
Yeah.
Chin,
Sure.
So yeah, I think all those basically it's kind of dabbling in some of these different like especially like Chinese traditions, and then Aikido, and then also reading those books I think made an impression on me.
Okay. Yeah, so my history with like traditional martial arts, and this will all bridge together, and it's I took some notes to try to remember some of this stuff, but Taekwondo was my very first art. And the reason for that, my parents put me into it. I don't even remember requesting going to martial arts, but like I said, we were into like Power Rangers and Beetleborgs and some of those like kids shows that were popular at the time. There's a lot of martial arts kind of stuff to it. But my dad was a Taekwondo guy through like high school, and he has like a clipping from the local paper of him like being in this tournament. And if you hear him talk about it, you would think he was the best Taekwondo practitioner of all time, kind of a thing.
Yeah.
There's this story that my uncle tells from time to time about him being bullied I think it was in high school, and my dad like roundhouse kicked this guy in the chest down a flight of stairs. And I always found that to be kind of a funny piece of lore that my dad would share. But so I think we probably did Taekwondo for a year, me and my brother Alec. And then
what kind of stuff do you remember? Like,
dude, when I think about it, I remember a lot of like breaking those fake boards. The ones that you could like snap back together. That was what I remember the most. Like I can remember during one of the promotion tests because they would bring you up to the front of the class, be like, okay, you need to break this board with whatever the technique was, and they had me do an axe kick, and I smashed through the board like. And I remember the feel, like it made me feel powerful as like a little 6-year-old kid.
I think there's value to. I think it's good to teach kids too to like follow through with their strikes,
for sure,
and not stop at the target.
No, certainly. So I do remember that, and I remember like before class sitting there and watching the adult classes, thinking like, oh my gosh, and based on what most people know about Taekwondo, it was probably really bad. But when you're looking at a bunch of guys wearing gis, like in unison doing like movements and stuff, I remember thinking like someday that's going to be me doing that. And
did you do like kata?
Yeah, there was kata. There was some kata involved, but a lot of it was like singular moves, like doing repetitions of single like reverse punches and that kind of stuff. But yeah, so that's like what I remember. We probably did that for like a year. I don't think I ever promoted in it, but it definitely like training in it, and I think that is probably why I became kind of obsessed with like martial arts movies, like Three Ninjas and the movies that we were just talking about and all that sort of thing. And then I did a little bit of karate at that age at another school. I don't remember anything about it. And then I didn't train again in any martial art until I was 16. And when I was 16, I was going to Olympic College, and there was a guy named Edgar, and he was a sensei at UKO Karate, which is in Port Orchard, and they had a Silverdale location as well. And it was a self-defense class. So, but it was like in hindsight, it was a pretty poor self-defense class from what I remember. Like for instance, like our final, I say that with air quotes, would be like guys standing in front of us, one behind us, and then on either side of us holding up kick pads. And then we would have to like front kick, back kick, kick to one side, kick to the other, all while like with the same foot, like kind of like a Jackie Chan movie, which would not work, kind of, But so I remember that. But he also brought in a guy that had worked with the police department, and he wore like a red man suit. And so we got to like do this. Okay, this guy's going to attack you. What are you going to do now? Which is kind of funny because it was something that we did in the police department. But so I did this self-defense class with that guy who was a sensei at the UKO Karate in Port Orchard. And that ended up leading me to meeting a guy that some of the guys from our gym actually know, or like they were in the same circle because the MMA community was so small. But it was called the House of Stone. and it was a guy named James Pollard that I remember, and a guy named Skylar Castillo, and they were the first people that ever showed me any type of jujitsu. And we had like puzzle mats that we pulled out after class. I was like, oh, I got to check some of this out. Then we do sparring and that kind of
What'd
stuff.
they show you?
One of them was like a leg entanglement from the bottom versus a standing opponent, which I always thought was kind of a
very
funny,
modern.
Yeah, big time, dude. And James Pollard, maybe I'll clip this and send it out, but he teaches at a place called Shaolin Mixed Martial Arts, which is like
I've heard of that.
Yeah, there's a place in Port Orchard and another place in Silverdale. But yeah, that was like, and they kind of like they ended up fighting MMA amateurs, and I think one of them, at least James ended up becoming a pro, but that led me down the being fascinated with like mixed martial arts and training that way, because they were piecing up all like the black belts from the traditional academies. And then eventually, like, so after that, and then like when I stopped training after that class. I never really trained again. I would meet up with those guys maybe for a few more months, and then when I turned like 18, I found a jiu-jitsu gym, but it didn't really stick. I was probably there for 6 months to a year even, but it was a really small gym, and it happened actually after a Krav Maga class. Like the instructor would rent it out after that to do it, but it didn't stick. So I didn't do it. So I was probably 19 and never did it again, or maybe even 17. But then 22, I entered the police academy, and we did like defensive tactics, which was at the time was all based on like traditional stuff. Like they were doing a lot of arnis, stick fighting with baton, and a bunch of stuff that would never work, which is kind of a, it's weird to think back to that, but yeah, they taught a bunch of more or less useless things. And then,
well, you know more about this. Sorry to interrupt,
go ahead,
but you know more about this than me, so I'm just curious. In your opinion, is there like a form of traditional stick fighting that you think is effective?
I think Arnis and Kali definitely. I mean, that's an interchangeable term, more or less. But I think that those guys.
That's from the Philippines.
Yeah, Filipino martial arts, and I actually did really play around with that for close to a year, because for those that don't know, like my dad's part Filipino, so as am I. So I messed around with it a lot. But the thing is, I just couldn't ever foresee a place where that would necessarily manifest, where you would have a stick or two, and much less the time to arm yourself with it before getting into a fight. Yeah, no, I get that, but they've at least studied it. But I think that like just traditional grappling, you're pretty. But like the stick is supposed to represent machetes, right? Because it was like kind of this tribal martial art, in theory, at least that's what the lore says. But
pretty scary.
Yeah, I find that stuff to be very fun. If it's, I don't necessarily know how useful it is. There's people that, and I would be willing to have my mind changed on it, but it wouldn't be something I would consider my primary martial art, but it's certainly something that I think is worthy of study alongside something else. So yeah, I did like the police academy stuff, and then ended up finding jiu-jitsu at the police academy, and that's pretty much all I focused on until last year. I did kendo, judo, kali, karate, Japanese jiu-jitsu, Wing Chun seminar for 2 days with Kevin Lee, 2 different knife combatives classes, like seminars. And because, I was doing jiu-jitsu, and then I just I was wanting some more of that tradition. So I ended up doing those classes, and I pulled a lot away from them. So I think like this last year, 2024, I probably did more traditional martial arts during that time than at any other point in my life. And actually one moment that kind of changed my perspective on the traditional martial arts is I went to a place called Warrior Life, which is in Gig Harbor, and the instructor was like, well, show me like what is your best move from, like, if you had me mounted. And I put him like a traditional armbar, and he had a training knife tucked away in his gi, took out the training knife, and then stabbed me in the upper thigh, like where my artery would be, and then drug it down to my knee. And I walked away from that like, dang, okay, like, I know that sounds, that the story might sound kind of corny, but it changed my perspective a little bit on like, oh yeah, this is something that could certainly happen, especially if someone, in their brain was like, well, if I ever get in this position, I'd have these knives on me or whatever. But yeah, that kind of like changed it. So like you guys, started reading a bunch of books during this time. So I read like Mind Over Muscle, which was written by Jigoro Kano, the guy that started judo. And some other books by like these karate masters, and I forgive me, I can't remember the names of any of them, but and I read The Art of War the Book of Five Rings by Musashi, just like trying to pull some of the traditional philosophy out of the books, because I was so fascinated with the arts themselves and how they were able to maintain that kind of a tradition. But yeah, I think the last year was really where I spent my most time in traditional martial arts over the last year, and I was already a blue belt at the time.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, that's a great segue, because I wanted to talk about, for our sort of last segment, like so we kind of all know, maybe we could touch on it a little bit, but we all know the goofy side of traditional martial arts, and the dark side too. Like, we shouldn't skip over that. But I want to talk about, like, what aspects do we think are redeeming that we could pull from traditional martial arts that we could bring to the jiu-jitsu mat or to a sort of modern martial art MMA kind of training?
Yeah. So I thought about this a lot, and at first I was getting really kind of caught up in the weeds trying to find, okay, is it the way they practice technique, or, I kind of went down that line of thinking. But ultimately I landed on the idea, like, and I know that specifically from, last year I got my red belt in karate. So I trained karate for long enough to get my first promotion. Then I pieced out because it was like a thing.
So what does a red belt mean?
It means that I paid some money for like 10 classes and then got promoted. Yeah, because I think that.
So it's after white belt?
Yeah, it's after white belt. It is after white belt. I did end up doing it with my dad, which was really cool. It's kind of like a Christmas present. But one thing that I took away from that class specifically, and the other arts for certain as well, like the Japanese jiu-jitsu, which is something more along the lines of Aikido than jiu-jitsu in my estimation when I was training it, but is this idea of being a complete martial artist. Like, and I don't just mean that from the standpoint of like combatives techniques. Like, well, yeah, okay, jiu-jitsu, you do focus on these ground techniques, or you're a ground fighter. I've loved that term. I know that it's like people don't like that term, but ground fighting, I just think that's such a slick thing to call it. But you need to know how to punch, you need to know how to kick, you need to know these throws, you should know a certain degree of weapon stuff. I am talking about that for sure, but I'm also talking about like the spiritual philosophy to it. Like, hey, why are we training these skills, right? And ultimately it comes down to wanting to, be able to protect yourself or a loved one in these situations. And, you should be carrying this mindset when you're out walking around the street and stuff.
Knowing when not.
No, which is almost never. Like, if you can walk away from a fight, you should walk away. Your ego can take the hit, and kind of a funny story about the complete martial arts. So Sam went out to her sisters were in town. They went to get these tattoos. They ended up being out at this tattoo parlor in Tacoma, not a nice part of Tacoma, until like late at night. And so I went out there just to grab the kids and hang out real quick. And I didn't have my car, so I had to borrow my mother-in-law's car. And I'm wearing sweatpants and slides, right? What I would show up to in jiu-jitsu before we're changing out to hit the mats. And she looked down at my shoes and was like, "You should probably change your shoes just in case if you're gonna go out to, out into, this rougher part of town to go grab the kids and Sam." And at first I was like, "What?" It's like, I can't believe she's calling me out on this. But then it was like, dang, she's totally right. And it's something that I've been a proponent of anytime I've had conversations about martial arts and clothing choices, right? Like, don't carry a gun while you're wearing sweatpants, kind of a thing. But so I kind of meditated on that. I was like, yeah, that's exactly right. Like, as a, if I were to be thinking like a complete martial artist, that like those little kinds of components come into it, right? Where I'm thinking like, okay, well, where am I going? What are some problems I might run into? Is my attire conducive to if there's some type of violent encounter and that sort of thing? And I think that the traditional martial arts do a better job of that.
Yeah.
Talking in those terms versus, talking about, a point system for the upcoming grappling tournament or whatever. So I think that as far as the emphasis on developing yourself, both your mindset and your physicality into being a complete martial artist, like taking it on as a lifestyle is one of the things that I think that we could probably do better in like the combat sports.
Diet is a big
space.
part of that.
Yeah, sure. And I think that the diet, as far as jiu-jitsu, I think that like fitness and diet is one of those things that like jiu-jitsu does well because it's a lot of the guys are kind of meathead-ish.
Yeah.
Or at least, have a tilt in that direction. So I think that there are, or fitness, right? Lifting weights and that sort of thing. So there is that bent in jiu-jitsu in certain regards, but I don't think we talk about things like, hey, when should you be walking away from a fight? When's it appropriate to get into a fight? Hey, let's try and roll around with some weapons for a little bit. What kind of weapons should you be carrying yourself? What should you be looking for? Developing your situational awareness and that kind of thing.
Well, just to piggyback on what you were saying earlier too, I always give guys a hard time for wearing sandals.
Do you?
For that reason.
Is that right? Or even if you have to run away.
I'm kind of half being tongue-in-cheek, but I'm also half serious. Like, what if there was an emergency that you had to respond to?
Sure.
Yeah. What if you had to sprint to get help or whatever?
You're never going to convince the Samoans to not wear their flip-flops, though. It's just not going to happen.
Yeah, you'll train with a guy who's a total bruiser, and he's just like he problem on the mat. And then he puts on his flip-flops and is like, walks out on the street. All right, see you guys later. Just, in my head, I'm just quietly judging that guy.
Well, yeah, in that self-defense class, like one of the red man things, one of the guys took off his shoes before standing onto the mat. And then the guy wearing the red man suit is just like a big padded suit. So you can punch and kick the guy and he's not going to feel any of it. It almost looks like it's like a thick layer of foam. Almost looks like a catcher's uniform from baseball. And, but yeah, the guy took off his shoes before starting, and the guy like pantomimed stomping on his foot, just trying to make a point. Like, why would you take off your shoes? Like, this is we're supposed to be in the middle of a street fight. Because the guy was, threatening him, and then he chose to take off his shoes before getting involved. It was kind of a funny deal. But anyway, so like, what as far as your experience with traditional martial arts, like, what did you pull away from that? Do you think that we could be doing better in jiu-jitsu, or was a redeeming quality?
So this sort of piggybacks on the philosophical aspect of it.
Okay.
Maybe slightly more specific. There's sort of two things that I thought about. One is there's this term in Chinese philosophy called Wu Wei. Have you ever heard of that?
Wu Wei. No.
It's not Woo Woo.
Yeah.
But
maybe is.
So Wu Wei, you find it a lot. It's related to Taoism. You find a lot in the Tao Te Ching.
Okay.
And it basically just means non-doing.
Yes.
Literally. It probably translates better as like effortlessness or something like that.
Is it similar to like empty mind? Like Zen, or I don't know if Zen is the right word, but maybe not.
Well, Zen is a kind of a Buddhism.
Okay.
But I think it's maybe related but different. But it's just one of those words. Anytime there's like a word like that doesn't really have a proper translation in other languages, it's sort of, I love it.
Yeah.
But it relates to just like knowing when to do less.
Okay.
Doing more with less. So like physically, obviously, like it relates a lot to like when we say an athlete is like in the zone and they're just
flow state.
Yeah, they're moving with grace and efficiency and it's like things are happening without them even having to think about it. And, I think it extends to other areas of life too. But just in terms of jiu-jitsu, like, it sort of captures like something that I'm always trying to explain to white belts, especially if they're like too spazzy or too crazy on the mat, is like, the whole point of this game is to learn how to be efficient and, learn how to do more with less. And so you can't put 100% of your effort into every movement. And also, like, it's funny because we use this term control. I always say, like, jiu-jitsu is all about control. That's like the one word that captures what we're doing. We're learning how to control another person. But what it means to control another person isn't what you think it means. Because it doesn't necessarily mean, like, I just like force you to do exactly what I want. You know what I mean? There's sort of like a process, and it starts with like, I accept that when I move, that you're going to move. Like if I grab you, you can grab me back.
Yes.
And I think that's what people struggle with. Like, and you see it with white belts, is they're just trying to like force you into the position that they want. And then like they get frustrated because like you're moving. It's like, well, of course I am. And so I think Wu Wei sort of captures how it's like you just control what's under your control.
Yeah.
And then like ultimately like you can steer things, you know, through practice, through jiu-jitsu, you can eventually get them into a place where they can't move.
Yeah.
But I think Wu Wei sort of captures like so much of like what I love about jiu-jitsu and what like I try to teach other people.
Yeah, that gives me this imagery of, when someone, like, I had this moment kind of recently where someone grabs, like, you grab someone's a sleeve grip or a wrist grip on someone, and they either break it and then grip your wrist or pull away. But when they re-grip your wrist, there's these times where it's like, okay, but I'm still connected to you in the way that I wanted to be connected to you if you're going to hold on to this, so I can make this work. Yeah, that's a good. I love bringing in little words like that, dude. I mean, we already stole os from Japanese martial arts systems, so why not steal some of this other stuff and make it more popular?
Yeah. Another thing that I really love is like, I don't know if this is even really a traditional notion necessarily, but it's like the idea of, well, let me say this. I love the aesthetics
of
traditional martial arts. And
that's why I love doing gi. Straight up.
Yeah. And, sometimes like we are so focused on effectiveness, and we should be, and that's sort of like what separates us from traditional martial arts in some sense. But I do think that there's a difference between beating somebody and looking good doing it.
I agree. Yeah.
And, I just love, that's why we love these movies too, is that like, the good guy can't just beat the bad guy. He's got to do it with like a spinning kick.
Yeah, totally.
Or a flying arm bar or something crazy like that.
My buddy Courtney would say, what's the number one rule of jiu-jitsu? Look cool. And he would teach classes and be like, we don't do it like this because number one, it doesn't look cool. And also it's not effective, but primarily it doesn't look cool.
See, I love that. Like, and I think it almost seems like there's like a movement now, like that's maybe Craig Jones is sort of like captured that, but there's almost sort of like a counter movement to like the taking jiu-jitsu super seriously that has prevailed, I think. And, like having some levity and having some humor and like having some piece of yourself, like being able to like put yourself and your personality into your jiu-jitsu.
Well, that's where the art comes from in martial art, right? Yeah. Like you have to have martial skill first, and then the artistic side gets to come out. Yeah, and I think like what you were just saying, that with the traditional arts, like the I've been saying like a lot on this podcast, and I'm realizing that, but you start to see it's not like taking it seriously. Like there's guys that take it seriously even in the traditional stuff, but they recognize, they have some wherewithal to realize what they're doing it because they love martial arts and it's fun. And sometimes I feel like that can be lost, at least for myself, when it comes to training jiu-jitsu, where I'm showing up not necessarily because I love it, but because I feel like I need to, almost like a chore. You get in there, you start rolling, and obviously that feeling fades very quickly, but when you have that recognition that, hey, I'm into this because it's fun and it's cool and it's...
You also become obsessed with like beating everybody in the gym.
Yeah.
Which is like, that's always going to be there. I'm not saying we need to totally eliminate that. Like the competitiveness is a crucial ingredient.
It's what sharpens the art.
Yeah, to the training. But, it should be fun, and it should be like ultimately like you are like building up something that is your own. Like your jiu-jitsu is your own.
Sure.
And if there's some artistry in there that, if you could be 5% more effective by like whittling that away and being more like, this or that black belt.
Yeah.
that's your choice. Like if you want to keep it like distinctive, and so I think that's something that we should cherish more, is just like the artistry.
You know, when you have said this in front of people before, and it always I felt flattered when you would say it, but you would say things like, well, just ask Aaron about that. He's got good judo. And like, I'm not ranked in judo. I've done a bunch of judo classes. I watch a lot of videos and do that kind of homework. But at that point, I was like, I want to be the judo guy in the gym. I want to know these throws. And I think that's a fun route to go, where you're like, I want to be the guy that really knows arm bars. This is going to be my style. I want this style to be the thing that people kind of know about me and come to me with questions, or just recognize that I have this, that I've developed this part of my game very well, to a point that it stands out against other guys that are into sort of the same thing. But
for me, it's submission, defense, and escapes.
Yeah, bottom side control.
I want to be the guy everybody comes to, like, how do you defend a Dars? Yeah. How do you defend an armbar?
Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
I want to be like untappable, like no matter what position you get me in.
Yeah, there's definitely guys in the gym that certainly feel that way.
Yeah.
Anyway, so we're coming to the tail end of our hour, and so what Cody had asked me to do is to come up with a prompt kind of for our next episode. And the prompt that I ended up coming up with, like, I thought this might be fun to talk about, because as I was reminiscing about, you know, these movies that I was really into and the other arts and that I had trained in the past and that sort of thing, was I want to know, who was your first martial arts hero or role model and why they were that for you? And who are some current ones for you now and why? I think that would be a good premise to a pretty fun conversation about, you know, guys, it could be MMA guys or jiu-jitsu guys, movie stars, whatever. But I think that everyone looked at someone at some point that got into martial arts and was like, man, I want to be able to do that. Whether it was a Jackie Chan or a Bruce Lee. Like, when you think about the amount of people those guys got into studying some type of martial art, I think it would be an overwhelming number. I think that everyone could point to someone, is what it comes down to. And that could be, it might be a Jocko Willink, right? Or a Joe Rogan. Well, the reason I started jiu-jitsu was because I listened to Joe Rogan and he had these MMA fighters on and all this sort of thing. But I think that could be certainly a fun conversation, because we're both kind of attracted to odd personalities and guys that are real characters in their, whatever their mode of combatives are. So I think that maybe we'll start off with the next episode with that.
Awesome.
Yeah, right on. Anyway.
And what do you want to be the topic of the episode in general?
Ooh. Okay, I would maybe, if someone looked to you as that person, what would you hope that they saw in you that made them want to get into martial arts? I think so. Anyway, guys, thanks for listening. This has been episode 3 of the Grappler's Dilemma podcast. If you guys want to reach out to us with any questions or any comments on the show, we have an Instagram, and that Instagram is at the Grappler's Dilemma. We also have an email, but I'm not sure if anyone's old enough to not have an Instagram, unless you're just by choice you choose to stay away from social media. But we also have an email, and that's the Grappler's Dilemma podcast at gmail.com. So I take a look at it every day. So if you guys have anything you want to ask us or anything you want to say or some show ideas, we would love to entertain that. And yeah, get out there and keep training. Os.